So great. So then for today's session, this was put together by a team of S4 members of Saltese, and we all wanted to take this initiative to bring colleagues and peers together and start having this discussion. So I'm going to allow my colleagues to introduce themselves. We can start off with Caroline.
Hi, my name is Caroline Cormier and I teach chemistry at Cégep André Laurando.
And Véronique.
Hi, my name is Véronique Turcotte and I also teach chemistry at Cégep André Laurando.
And then we have Carl.
Hi, Carl Laroche, a biology teacher at Vanier.
And we have Jean-François.
Hi, Jean-François Brière. I'm teaching physics at Dawson.
And then we've got Sean.
Morning, everyone. Sean Hughes from John Abbott College. I teach chemistry.
And we also like to mention that this workshop is supported by Saltese. And so we'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Saltese team, in particular Liz Charles, for helping us with our initiative today. So let me give you guys a heads up on what we have planned for today's session. We'll look at, we'll give you an introduction to the new science program that's actually going to be given by Caroline Cormier. And then JF, or Jean-François, he's going to go over the key differences between the current program and the new program. At that point, we'll go into breakout rooms according to the discipline so that we can have this opportunity to speak to our colleagues from different colleges within our same departments and also from university. We'll take a break for 10 minutes and gather our thoughts, and then we'll come back together and share some of the key points that came out of those discussions. We'll then finish off with Sean. He is going to be talking about bridging theory and lab practice together through inquiry-based labs, and then we will wrap up. So you can see here that we don't have the full 3 hours. We don't suspect we'll go the full 3 hours, but we'll see how the discussions go during the breakout sessions. Okay, our goals for today's session is, hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have a better understanding of the new science program, and that through our discussions, we'll be able to see what opportunities lie ahead, possibly challenges for universities, since our program has changed. What you can expect from our students as they graduate from the Cégep system. We give you an introduction and introduction to the inquiry-based labs, and hopefully, give you that motivation to try something new, implement something new as you look into how you'll set up the new courses at your colleges. And hopefully this will be the start to a continued conversation that we'll have between our peers after this workshop, and we'll be able to develop or continue our discussions through our communities of practice. Okay, so we'll first start off with Caroline Cormier, and she'll give us an introduction to the program.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you again, everyone, to joining us today. Sean called that a summit, and I hope that, well, it's a bit pompous, but I think it's a really good opportunity to meet with all of you, and certainly a new opportunity to meet with university faculty. So welcome again, everyone. And I will take that brief moment not only to present to you the new program, that's actually will be more the job of Jean-François just after me. So keep in mind that after the generalities that I will present now, Jean-François will go more deeply into some of the details. Let's go back and to the reasons why we have a new program now. As you know, as you might know, the science program was exactly the same since 1998, and basically the same since 1995, because the two different programs were quite the same at the time. So maybe it was the time just to, brasser les cartes, change a bit of things, and try to do something better. A lot of people say, well, we don't need to do something better because the science program, it works and it's good and it works well, and the science students arrive well prepared at university and everything. And that's true. But as with everything, maybe we can do a bit better. So I will talk just a little bit about those opportunities and maybe the challenges that are ahead. First, I would like just for you to know that in CEGEP program, there are goals, and in the new program, there are 6 goals. And those goals are not the same as the competencies. So just for the vocabulary of things, we have 13 mandatory competencies, which directly translate into course. So one competency, one course. And then above all of that, as a big umbrella, you have the 6 goals, which are basically good intentions. And that's kind of a problem because good intentions don't always translate into subjects that are taught in class. So let's just have a look to those 6 goals and the way it's formulated in the program, the document given us by the ministry. It says, upon completion of their studies in science, students will be able to do such and such and such. But as you can see, it's really large and overarching everything. For example, use discipline-specific knowledge to consolidate and enrich one's general scientific knowledge. So that's basically course contents. Analyze and solve complex situations from an interdisciplinary perspective. Also, that's new. But how can we do interdisciplinary if it's not in the course? Well, we will see that. Appreciate connections between the science, technology, and society. So that's not only, science concepts and notions and equations. It's also more like of an educational as a citizenship thing. Demonstrate critical thinking and intellectual rigor. Use digital technology in a scientific context, and develop a spirit of collaboration and communicate. So those 2 last things were already in the current program. Those 6 goals, when I said the program was good, and why should we try to fix something that ain't broken? There was something here that was actually a bit broken. In 2008, the CEEC, la Commission d'évaluation de l'enseignement collégial, when they evaluated the science program, they said, well, those goals are not taken into account in teaching. And you write down those goals in the program, but you actually don't cover them. So there was something here. There's an opportunity, the first opportunity maybe, knowing that we have those goals, to try and develop the grille de cours to the new program with that in mind. So let's take that as a first opportunity. And when I said students finish their science studies with a good amount of preparation for university, let's look at what the university faculty that were consulted between 2014 and 2017 regarding the new program, what those professors said about the students. And it was not like all was good, all was perfect. For example, the knowledge integration. Science faculty said they consider that students have not adequately integrated disciplinary knowledge. So students learn in silos. and it's difficult for them to integrate the knowledge. And the same thing was said 3 years later. Integration of learning is at the heart of universities' concerns, both disciplinary and cross-disciplinary. And as you can see here, we see again that thing, interdisciplinary. Another thing that the science graduates were not actually well prepared or not well enough prepared for university. It's the scientific thinking and autonomy. For example, CEGEP's graduates are accustomed to following predetermined protocols and are caught off guard when faced with an open-ended problem, which they must solve by figuring out how to proceed on their own. And then 3 years later, the primary goal of laboratory learning is to develop autonomy in learners through, among other things, greater ownership of the laboratory protocol. So I'm pretty sure that the faculty among you, the university professor among you, might think the same. Students are not quite autonomous in developing their own laboratory procedures. And another bit of opportunities, let's call them opportunities more than challenges. The exit profile, that's something that we as CEGEP teachers have to think about, and we have to design it. And to design that, we have to ask ourselves in department and in the program, in each institution, what is a good science graduates from our program? What is exactly that exit profile that we want for our institution? So for that, we have to take into account the expectation of the universities, because we are basically, that's our job, to prepare students to their university studies, while building on the research on educational research, because those results inform us of how to better prepare students to respond to those expectancies. To have a good exit profile, you have to work in program approach. And that's something in the CEGEP, but I think it's something as well in university, that concept of program approach. Everyone should work together, and not only in a single discipline, that's vertically in a discipline. All the courses should follow each and the other, but also horizontally or cross-disciplinary, across disciplines, because the program approach is the two things. So you have to plan the program to that effect. And to do the exit profile, the goal of that is to devise a learning progression to teach science process skills to respond to the expectancies that I talked about earlier. So those science process skills, I've listed a couple of them here, but as you can see, data interpretation, problem solving, experimental design, and so on. And Sean will be talking about that at the very end of our meeting today, when he will talk about scientific autonomy and inquiry-based learning. So let's just put that as a basis for reflection on the exit profile. Two concepts that I find so inspiring. Those two concepts are depth versus breadth and educating citizens, and not only teaching scientists. So depth versus breadth is, you should be teaching one concept more deeply than try to cover superficially a large amount of concepts that will not be integrated, because it's only a list of concepts. So if you are interested on reading on that, for example, to move away from the tyranny of coverage, and the tyranny of coverage, that's a real concept. It was developed and taught about with those authors at the bottom. Most of the time, the tyranny of coverage is imposed by teachers themselves. So they try to go above what is exactly written in the competency in the program, because they think they have to cover everything. So that's the tyranny of coverage. So that's one concept. And the other thing is the difference between what we call vision 1 training scientists, versus Vision 2, that is educating citizens. And for that, I will just remind you, and there should be an equilibrium between the two. Yes, you have to teach Vision 1 and Vision 2, but most of the time, Vision 2 is too little concerned in the courses. So just as a reminder, there were 2 goals in the 6 goals that I talked about earlier. Those 2 goals here are actually Vision 2. The program intends to form actual citizens in science, not only to form scientists, because we are at the pre-university level, right? And as a brief conclusion on my topic, the program, the text that the ministry gives you, it's only one actor. You have the power to create the exit profile. You have the power to make decisions, because educational experience should be made coherent using the program approach to develop science process skills. And this requires focusing on the goals of the program rather than just those of the course. And the other thing is the tremendous potential of a coherent curriculum approach could also allow space to address social scientific issues, which require input from more than one discipline. And those 2 sentences are taken out from a paper that is accepted but not yet published. If you want to read it, I put the reference at the bottom here, and it will be published in the next edition of the Canadian Journal of Science, Mathematics and Technology Education, a paper I wrote with my colleague Bruno Voisard. So thank you for your attention.
All right, so I guess I'm next. So Happy New Year, everyone. Nice to see all of you in here. So I know, looking at the list of people that are in this workshop, I know that I'm not the most qualified to talk about the new program. Many of you know this one much better than I do. I've been asked to do this today mostly because I've been working also with Salties on a platform that is helpful to design new programs that is called Coursela, I'm sorry. So I'll basically be introducing this very quickly at the same time. This might be a way for us to save time by sharing things a little bit more easily. So my point is really to give you an overview so that everyone knows the basic about the new program. I don't want to go into the details of what content is cut or added. We'll do this when we go to the discipline-specific breakout rooms. All right. So just to get started, we basically have a couple of differences. So maybe I'll start with the new basically number of hours for both typical profiles for the science program. So the Health Science and Pure and Applied Science profiles. So if we go with the mandatory competency, so the competencies that have to be taken by all the students in health science, for instance, you can see that in biology, there's actually an increase of 15 hours of class. In math, we get an increase of 15 hours as well, but we'll see that there are some variation in there. Chemistry, there's a loss of 20 hours, physics, loss of 15 hours as well. But the 2 big changes that we have are that, oh, sorry, I'm going too fast, are for computer science, that is now part of the mandatory competencies, that there's an additional 45 hours. And also there's an integrative course that I'll discuss a little bit better later, that is also accounting for 45 hours. In health science in general, the students had the possibility to have an option course, but currently with the new program, this is no longer an option, so they are losing this extra course. So that's basically the first part. So for Pure and Applied, it's slightly different. Okay, so for Pure and Applied, actually in biology now, everyone has to take a second course in biology. So there's actually an increase of 30 hours in class time. Mathematics, still an increase of 15 hours. Chemistry, loss of 15 hours. But I think Carmen was just saying in the chat that I miscalculated things. So I don't know anymore. Physics, minus 15 hours as well. Computer science, again, is there, so plus 45 hours. And there's also the integrative course that is there for another 45 hours. So the extra thing in pure and applied is that there's optional competencies that can be taken as well. So in general, for most CEGEP, I think this were 3 classes of 75 hours that were taken. Some CEGEPs were doing things slightly differently. So these 225 hours are now reduced to only 120 hours in the new program. So this is basically where most of the hours were taken from. The total number of hours, though, for both profiles are still 900 hours of specific education, so that is not changing. The other big difference with the new program, aside from the number of hours that are changing, is the fact that it's much more prescriptive. Okay, the old program that we can see in the middle column in here had, for each competency, had the statement of the competency, also had elements of the competency and criteria for performance criteria also for the full competency. But now what's added with the new program is that there is all this box in red that you can see on the right-hand side that are performance criteria, but for each of the elements of competencies. So this means that there's much less room for interpretation, and actually the details of what has to be covered is much more specific. There are also additional specifications for each of the competencies that are going into the nitty-gritty of exactly what to include in the competency. So we should expect, probably for those of you who are in the university, less variation from CEGEP to CEGEP in terms of content that is covered in the courses. The main losses with the new program, okay, and here there's a bit of a subjective point of view on this, okay, this is from my opinion. There's a reduction in content of the mandatory competencies in bio, math, chemistry, and physics, okay. Some things are added, but some things also are removed. So for the folks that are teaching at university, that's probably a good thing to know. Number of optional courses are reduced by 1. So from health, they go from 1 to 0, and pure and applied goes from 3 to 2. The integrative course can mitigate this a little bit, but still this means that for at least physics teachers or CEGEP teachers, I think this means narrowing probably the number of offers of optional course that are sometimes something really nice to teach and to give a little bit of difference between different CEGEP. Organic chemistry 2 probably cannot no longer be offered, or they will have to be really creative in order to offer it. So that's one of the other difference. There will be very likely a reduction from 75 hours to 60 hours for all option course. So that includes organic chemistry, human biology, Cal 3, engineering physics. So all these courses, some of them had equivalencies for university. It will have probably to be reevaluated, to be slightly modified, or accommodation will be required. So that's probably a topic that will come up in the breakout rooms later, I guess. Technically, there's also the new competency for the general option courses. So the Cal 3, engineering physics, and all of these. In the program description, it says that it has to be at least 60 hours. Since there's 120 hours for optional competencies in the pure and applied stream, this probably means that there's 2 options, either to have a 60-hour class, or 2 60-hour class, I'm sorry, or 1 single 120-hour class, which I guess is acceptable in terms of the new program, but in practice, I don't know what outcome we'll get from this. On the side of the gains, okay, I think that from what the university teachers' surveys were saying, there's at least a couple of things that have been taken into account, and I think that can have a beneficial outcome on the students. First, there's a computer programming class for all science students. So it's no longer just optional, everyone will have that. It's 45 hours. And the way the competency was written, it says explicitly that the goal is to automate problem solution in a scientific context. So it's not just about learning to program, it's really learning to use programming skills in the scientific context. Same thing for the new math class in probability and statistics, okay, that everyone will take again, 45 hours. In that competency, it says explicitly that we're talking about the natural science with the, solve problems in the field of natural science with the use of statistical methods and concept of probability. So again, we really want to tie it with the scientific approach. And finally, there's the project-oriented integrative course, which is asking, as Caroline was saying, to really demonstrate the interdisciplinary approach to show that the students are able to connect ideas from different disciplines together. So these are the 3 main new things in the program. And in order to create these, well, some other things had to go. So that's the bad part. Okay. If you want to play with the course competencies and also the goals of the programs, I'm sorry, there's a template that is available on the platform CourseFlow that I will show you in 1 second. Okay, to access it, you need to use have an account with Salties or with the MyDaylight platform. So you can basically do so by going to the website that is there, mydaylight.org, and you just ask for signing up. If you, whoops, I'm sorry. Once you are there, you can basically just search for science and in the project and select project. And I've already designed a template for this that I'll show you in 1 second that you can just copy, and then you can restart with already the competencies that are there. The element of competencies and the performance criteria are not there yet because we are waiting on the official translation in order to add everything. But as soon as it's out there, we'll add it as well so that everyone can avoid basically having to enter everything by hand. All right. So basically the general look of it, just here. All right. So if basically you look at the courses that are in the new program that I want to show in here. So this is the CourseFlow platform. So the idea is that in this project, there is basically the science program. So in all of the columns, you have the different disciplines. And for each of these disciplines, we have the different courses that are already created. And with each of these courses, if you click on the small side, you can see right away what is the competency that is attached to this course. Also, the numbers of hours are already in there right away so that it can be a little bit easier. And you can play with it. So I think that one thing that most of us that will be designing or working on the design of the program these days will be doing is shift courses basically around from one term to the other. So basically with this program, it's really easy to do this and to just basically play with everything around like this. There are other views that are really interesting to basically see how things are progressing so that you can have a full view of the 4 semesters. So in the case of the science program, there's an outcome table that you can use. That is nice. There's still a small bug in here. The titles of the column is not quite working yet. But the idea is that you can see in one glance, basically which competency are assigned to which course. In the case of the science program, this is pretty much a one-to-one connection, so it's not that surprising. In technical programs, it's a feature that is much nicer. But also you can see that we added the goals at the bottom in here. So as Caroline was saying, the goal is often something that is super important, but that is never really thought of as we design the courses or the program. So this would be one way to make sure that the goals are achieved basically in the program as we go from one course to the other. Another thing that I wanted to show you is if you go in the program outcomes analytics view, then you can have at the same time all the hours. Oops, that's not the one. I'm sorry. I always mix them up. It's the program outcome evaluation matrix that gives you the number of hours for each term. So for specific education, for general education, the total number of hours, and also divided by theory, practical, and individual work. So you can have at one glance really an overview of what's going on with your full program. All right, so this is there. I'm just showing this to you so that you can know that it's there, that it's easy to duplicate, that it's easy to export to Excel, so that instead of recopying all the competencies, everything in there, it's easier to basically get started right away from this. And I think that's all I had to say, right? Yeah, it is. So back to you, Carmen, I guess.
Thank you, JF. I was wondering if anyone has any questions for Caroline or Jean-Francois at this point. We could take some questions at this time. Annie-Hélène has a question. Is this in My Projects in CourseFlow?
So in order to get there, you have to go on Explore or the magnifying lens at the top, and then search for Science, selecting Projects, and you will see it and you'll be able to duplicate it.
Yeah, and the great thing is all that information is already there. So it's just a matter of duplicating, and you can just play with it, change things up, add your own competencies, or even go down all the way down to the level of activities, the learning activities. Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, just a quick question on the evaluation of goals versus the competencies. So the competencies are sort of set out course by course. If you pass the course, you're said to have achieved that competency. How are the goals being assessed? And in terms of an evaluation, for instance, can I know they're more broad, but and perhaps a little bit more difficult to evaluate. But if we start assigning particular developments to courses, I mean, are we able to evaluate sort of that progression of goals, or does that just leave? Is that just left to the end of and sort of the end of program project course?
Yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
Hi, Michael. Actually, no. When you have your diploma in CEGEP, you only need the credits for the courses, the épreuve synthèse de programme, which is
The comprehensive.
I don't remember.
Comprehensive.
Yeah, the comprehensive assessment,
Yeah.
and the mandatory language evaluation. So that actually, if you want to evaluate the goals, that would be part of the course. And if it's part of the course, it's part of the syllabus, but it's decided by the teachers. And I suppose actually those goals can be put into the capstone course, but it should be, they should be part of evaluation from every course that is relevant. Because if you evaluate it only at the end, well, it might not have been taught in the courses previous. So, and that's one thing that the teachers have to decide. And that's a reason to use the course flow, as Jean-François explained. You put a bit of things in all of the courses, and horizontally and vertically, and you plan that everywhere in the program to avoid only evaluating in the last course. That might have been the case in the certain institutions with the current program, but that's not the way to do it. So, but to have the diploma, you are not supposed to be evaluated on the goals, but the goals are supposed to be part of the program as developed by the institution. So that's a responsibility on the teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, then what we'll do now is we will go into our respective breakout rooms and have our interdisciplinary discussions. We'll have 4 breakout rooms set up, and you can choose to go into the ones that that suits you. We've got Carl, who's going to mediate the biology discussion. Sean will be in the chemistry discussion. We have Kevin Davis from the math faculty or the math department at John Abbott, and he'll be mediating the math discussion. And then we've got JF, who will be doing the physics and engineering discussion. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll go over kind of the key points that came out of our discussions. I hope you all had a great discussion. We certainly did in the chemistry group. And so, and there was some mention of some important, I think important things that we would want our other colleagues to hear from that are outside the chemistry discipline. So we'll take some time to go over what came out of each of the groups, and then from there we'll look at inquiry-based labs. Sean will give a presentation on that, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so how about we go with biology first? So Carl, would you mind taking over?
Not at all.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so biology meeting was quite interesting. Well, I think for everybody, for me as a program coordinator in particular, we started off discussing and I guess lamenting the lack of flexibility in the new program and the decrease in option courses, or the complete lack of option courses that would be available for students that were following what is now considered to be like a health science profile. And talking about potentially interesting option courses that could be offered, and team teaching, and worried about, okay, well, can we suggest this or that or the other thing on top of it all, because of issues with allocation and how the overall allocation pie is being spread out. But from that, we started getting into a discussion about what actually is required. Now, the ministry is presenting this universal profile that we have to offer, that all the CEGEPs have to offer this universal profile. But we discussed exactly how much of that universal profile, in particular the option courses, really, because the other things that they're compulsory, but from those optional competencies that are part of the universal profile, that being what is really an anatomy and physiology competency and an organic competency, how much of that is actually required in the sense of what exactly are the prerequisites for admission into various university programs. And it was, we had Professor Tamara Western, who I'm assuming is still here with us. And that was, I'm very glad that she was with us, because she was able to enlighten us that these might not be as much prerequisites as we thought they were. And so I think there's some research that needs to be done, and maybe more meetings of this nature to be had, where we really engage in discussions with the universities about exactly what's required for admission into particular programs. Because I think it's our responsibility as we're crafting these programs now to be sure about what the students have to do and what we can offer them. For example, do students, maybe students who are going into health-related fields need to take the anatomy and physiology competency, but maybe the ones who are going into more life science-related fields don't. Maybe there are other biology-related competencies or topics that we can offer them, and maybe that's a possibility, and one that I certainly hadn't, and I'm not sure others had really considered before. And so I think we really need to explore this further with our university colleagues to figure out exactly what the prerequisites from what's written out now, what they will be for various university programs. So we can feel confident, if it's possible, to offer other profiles to students that will allow them to gain access to the programs that they would like to make. And they can then make choices in CEGEP. And, if they make a choice and don't fulfill a particular prerequisite, well, that was a choice that they made. But we need to be clear about what these things are in CEGEP, and so that we don't misdirect the students. So that was quite eye-opening for me. And then we talked about the particular biology competencies and a discussion of the amount of content that is there, and lamenting that it will be difficult to explore anything in depth, linking back to what Caroline said right off the top, that it will be difficult just because of all of the prescribed content that the ministry is offering us. It's not necessarily even teachers thinking, oh, well, we have to cover all of this content. It's in there. And so it will be difficult to explore a lot of these concepts in depth because of the amount of prescribed content from the ministry. And some discussion about the best way to order the various different competencies. It seemed like, yeah, okay, go ahead. Sorry. It seemed like just the way it's presented, like the Bio 1 competency would come first and the Bio 2 competency would come second. But it seems that there are some CEGEPs that are considering offering them in a different order, just because they think that might make the transition a little bit easier for the students, and also because that would leave room for the development of chemistry competencies earlier in the program, which would be important for the Bio 1 competency. And if they approach this a little bit too early without this chemistry background, that could be a little bit more difficult for them. And I did miss some of the conversation in the middle because I got a phone call from a doctor that I needed to take. So I might be misrepresenting some stuff or missing some things, but I think that's more or less everything that took place during our breakout.
Great, thank you, Carl. There are a couple of hands that went up. First, there was Karen from McGill Admissions.
Hi, about Carl asking about the prerequisites regarding university. We're pretty clear on what the prerequisites are in terms of which courses, and we have a very good interface with all the CEGEP advisors. So if the students speak to their advisors, they certainly will know what they need to get in terms of which courses. It's also on all the university websites. It's certainly possible that the teachers may not always know which particular course is required. In some cases, the prerequisites are absolute. There's no way getting around them. In other cases, the prerequisites are, it could be possible to be admitted to a lot of programs. Even if you're missing a prereq, you would have it added onto your program at McGill or integrated into your program where possible. That particularly applies to organic chemistry, I suppose. Everybody's going to have calculus. I saw Laura Pavelka's name up here, so she could probably speak to organic. It's kind of an issue in that the different colleges do not seem to be teaching the same material at each place, so we can't always give equivalents, but organic is still a requirement to get into a few programs at McGill, non-negotiable equivalent, prerequisite.
Sorry, Carmen, can I just jump in quickly as a response specifically to Karen, if that's okay? I do know that the prerequisites are very clear. I've done some research on that, but this is a new program, right? So the discussion is, will that anatomy and physiology competency be a prerequisite or not? Because it goes quite a bit further than what our general biology 2 does right now. So that to me is really the question about whether that optional competency in the new program will be a prerequisite or not. And I'm not sure if you guys have considered that yet or not.
We're
discussions to have.
We're waiting for a lot of the dust to settle, to be honest. We weren't planning on restructuring our programs, so that implies that if any material is not being adequately covered in the CEGEP, that it would then make a longer program for the student at McGill. I'm just thinking out loud here. So I think we really need to see in practice first what this is going to be.
Région, thank you, Karen. I just wanted to address Région's question when Carl was referring to other profiles. He's speaking to profiles or programs at the university level. So based on the new program, based on the new CEGEP program, which profiles can students or which programs can students apply to at the university level and be qualified for with the correct prerequisites?
Well, actually, no, that's not what I meant.
Oh, sorry. Okay, my bad.
No, I meant because there's a universal profile right now. This is, you take this and you get access to everything. That's the idea that the ministry is, that's what the ministry thinks. Anyways, I don't have a ton of confidence in what the ministry thinks anymore, but that's what they seem to think. But if students don't have to take the anatomy and physiology competency, and they don't have to take organic chemistry 1 in order to get access to biology let's say, in university. Maybe we could offer them an ecology course, or maybe we could have a different profile. For example, like Dawson offers the environmental sciences profile right now, right? Maybe that's still an option, which it didn't seem like it initially was to me. So maybe we could offer different profiles in CEGEP tailored to specific interests that could still gain access to life science related programs in university. That's more what I was suggesting.
Okay, Jean?
Yeah, Carl. So are we talking about, I mean, sticking or going back to the health profile and or whatever word you want to use instead of profile, the health or the pure and applied, or another kind of route where there would be more specific courses? Is that what the discussion was all about? Or
I think the discussion was an eye-opening that this type of thing could be a possibility, that it could be more than just, here's the universal profile. Anybody that is currently a health student has to do this. And then we could offer some more applied science or pure science option courses for others who are going into engineering, that kind of thing. I think it was a little bit eye-opening to me that there might be a little bit more wiggle room on the health side than I really initially thought there might be.
Oh, okay. So you mean that the health part is just tweaked a bit, but essentially we're not talking about like creating a third profile or something else that would have something very different from health, or different from health and different from pure.
Hey, Reg, there are 2 60-hour option courses. That's the tweaking that's possible. It's not going to be a huge change one way or another for anybody, right?
Okay, so how about we move on now, and we'll ask Kevin to give a summary of their discussion in the math breakout room.
Sure. So we have 4 required courses, and so we just stuck to looking at those, plus computer science, because we had a couple of computer science people present. The good news is the stats course. I think everybody's pretty happy to see that in the program. It's a very basic stats course, but a very traditional, solid one, and it seems to have a sort of a scientific focus on it. And so it really seems like it's intended to come fairly early in the program, hopefully, and to prepare students to walk into their laboratory sciences with basic statistical tools. So that's, I think a totally positive thing. It's also great when they get into second year and they're doing option courses with projects, possibly the integrating course, if they're doing a project there, having the stats in the back pocket is great. So we didn't have really anything to criticize about it. It's just a nice, solid, basic intro stats course. Cal 1, Cal 2 is a more complicated beast. The Calculus 1 course, very, very similar to what we currently have, very traditional, and still 75 hours. The hours were maintained. Unfortunately, the Calculus 2 course, it has, if anything, more content than the previous one, if you look at the total of it, because they added some things and reduced just a little bit of other things, but it cut 15 hours. So basically, we don't know how to teach it. That's what it comes down to. It's a lot of content. This is a course that I think has the highest or close to the highest failure rate of the science courses in the program, and it's been made harder. So it's just very difficult for us to get our heads around. What we're going to do with it isn't totally clear yet. We may have to look at shifting some competencies between Cal 1 and Cal 2. I'm not sure that that's actually allowed, but it may not be possible to cover everything in Cal 2. If we do something like that, it would definitely have to be in collaboration with other CEGEPs. You definitely want to have a student who takes a course at one CEGEP, have that be equivalent to another course at another CEGEP. But it's a real challenge. We're really, really not sure. During the consultation process, an earlier iteration of the program had a lot less content in Cal 2. And we complained a lot in the consultation process that some of the stuff that was removed from Cal 2 was really essential, really fundamental, and would make the course no longer equivalent to what would be taken in Calculus 2 in university. And so they put that content back, which was great. They just didn't put back the hours. So it leaves us with a conundrum, and it's going to be a real challenge. And I think it's going to be very necessary to collaborate between CEGEPs on a common approach, hopefully, and just for ideas on how to how to deal with this. Linear algebra, no problems there. They removed some content that's pretty abstract and takes some time to cover, and they also removed some hours. And so what's left is a reasonable course. No one had any concerns about it. It's pretty similar to what was before, just missing a couple of things, but missing hours too. The computer science course is very interesting, of course, because it's brand new. It's a wonderful addition to the program. I think everybody's happy to see it there. It's only a 3-hour course, so students will hopefully pick up the basics of a programming language. But there's a really nice focus in the competencies on technical and scientific applications of computer science. And so the hope is that there might be some collaboration between math and computer science, maybe with the stats course in particular, maybe with the calculus or linear algebra courses, where students could solve problems in math using computer science techniques. And that could go either way. You could actually do some math problems in your programming course, or you could do some programming in your math course. So there might be some nice synergies there. But other than that, that's basically it. That's where we ran out of time.
Thank you, Kevin. And I'm glad you're able to continue also or have part of a conversation there for computer science. Christopher, would you like to add to that or Kevin's summary?
Yeah, sorry, hi. I joined a little bit late, so I actually wasn't part of the discussion because I had a physio appointment this morning, but I am a math teacher. I am from Marianopolis, so nice to meet all of you. I wanted to say that I actually was on the provincial writing subcommittee for the mathematics competencies. And Kevin, what you said was exactly right. Calculus 2, when I left the committee, I felt we had left a manageable course. And then in the final consultation, so we had removed sequences and series entirely. And that was the trade-off, was rather than trying to make micro cuts or whatever, we removed an entire unit thinking that, well, those going into engineering, that could be moved into a Calculus 3 course, covered there, which actually we do at Marianopolis anyway. So it would sort of make more sense in a Calculus 3 course, and those going into health wouldn't need it. But as you said, in that final consultation, people were up in arms about the removal of that topic. And so it got put back in without much more being taken out. And so I absolutely agree that the course that is there is not the course that I helped create. And I don't think, I think you're spot on that that'll be a real challenge that'll be our one big challenge course, is how to make that Cal 2 work. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you for that perspective. That's useful to know.
Okay, so then at this point, we'll move on to physics.
All right, so there were a lot of participants in physics. So after not so long, I decided to switch approach, and we basically had something that was basically a little bit more participative, where people were able to basically post their ideas, and then we refined it a little bit. So I'll go over the refinement. Sadly, we only had chance to go over the strengths and weaknesses, but I'll address basically all of them very quickly. So for the last two parts, maybe it will not be all consensual, because not everyone basically had their say for that. So it's my analysis of it. So for the strength, I think everyone, or most of the people, were happy about seeing prob stats and the computer programming class in there. There's a lot of opportunities to reuse these later in the program in labs and elsewhere in projects. So everyone is happy with this. A lot of people were happy with the fact that there's more uniformity in content coverage across the CEGEPs, because it's more prescriptive, so that was good. Addition of the environmental topics was also seen as being something positive, although it's a little bit of an add-on on an existing course without really a nice thread in it. So if we go on the weakness side, there's one point that we talked a lot about, is the possible variation in preparedness between students that are coming from the Quebec system and the students who are coming from outside. One of the big things in physics is that there's it's clear now there's no integration in the electricity and magnetism course, which was before something that was covered in many CEGEPs, but not in all CEGEPs. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. So there will need to be some talk with universities to make sure that everyone basically offers something that is a transition that is nice. Then there's various loss of contents in different courses, especially in waves and modern physics, and also in E&M. And but not everyone agrees on which one should stay, which one should go, and all of this. Anyway, we don't have much control over this. And there are some people who still feel that the tyranny of content that Caroline was talking about at the beginning of the talk is something that is even more present than before, but for others, it seems pretty manageable. Okay, so I think it depends on the point of view. Maybe it depends also on at which semester each course is given, depending on the strength of the students from different semester can vary quite a lot. If we move on to the opportunities, there was a big cloud or basically of things that were opportunities to do more interdisciplinary stuff, opportunities to reuse computer science and stats more broadly and more presently. There was basically other things that were coming in here, like the idea of having maybe stats, uncertainties, treated more similarly across different disciplines and possibly across CEGEPs as well. And in the threats part, there were basically three polls, I think, or four polls that I would say. There's this threat of meds, of course, that are created because of the loss of hours. I think that's a concern for many people. The challenge of designing the integrative course, because it's something that is quite new. Not many CEGEP have any experience with this. There's these 6 goals that we need to integrate, but it's not obvious what's the way of doing this. Then there were a bunch of other comments that were mostly about content and specific things, so I won't go over these. The last one, Karen, I wanted to ask during the meeting, but we didn't have time, so I'm asking you on the spot in front of 60 people. What do you mean by the loss of common codes open doors to different decisions by university?
Well, the Quebec has told us the common course road codes like the NYABC series, okay, on paper, because they had the same course number, they were treated as equivalent no matter which CEGEP, okay? There's no longer any obligation for any common course codes. Any CEGEP can number any course the way they want, including perhaps the same course with a couple of different numbers in the same CEGEP, I don't know. We're not in the business of evaluating course descriptions from every college, and one of our big concerns is there going to be a divergence between what is actually taught? And I say this because we've seen this happening with organic chemistry a lot. Although everybody has the same competency course code when they take an organic chemistry course, the material doesn't appear to be covered to the same degree at different colleges, to the point where we've given some people an equivalent to McGill Organic from some CEGEPs, but not others, despite having a common competency code. So I'm hoping that this door doesn't open even wider, because it's kind of a disaster.
Okay, thanks. So that wraps up what I wanted to say. I see that Jeremy, your hand is in the air. Please jump in.
Yeah, thank you. Just as in response to that, I think it's clear from our discussions here that that's already happening, right? We don't all teach the same thing exactly for the same courses at the moment. So I think what's happening is, since organic chemistry is a special course that can sometimes be given credit for or not, McGill has looked more closely at how it's being taught in different places. What you haven't done is look carefully at how Cal 1 is being taught, and how mechanics is being taught, and E&M is being taught, or Chem NYB is being taught, because those, by default, I mean, you'd never have students retake those at university if they've taken them at CEGEP. If you actually did go look how they're being taught in different places, you'd probably find as much difference as you're finding for organic right now. So I think in the new program, no matter what we call the courses, each competency is clearly attached to a course. There's a bio 1, a bio 2, chem 1, chem 2. Those will be, everybody will be teaching from the same description. And if universities decide that those courses are recognized, then we'll be in exactly the same situation we are now. Maybe the codes will be different, but it's just going to be a question of mapping which code goes to which competency, because it's still one competency, one course.
I could just comment on that. Absolutely, there's no question. I agree with you. We know that the material is not always identical. However, it's been, and I'm speaking for myself here, there's been some wallpaper applied, okay? And the fact that there was the same course number made a lot of people comfortable with saying it's the same thing everywhere, even though we know it isn't. And for the most part, students managed fairly well, okay? But this totally opens the door to potentially different reaction. And yes, I know the competencies. I've been following the CEGEP program course changes for 30 odd years, so it's not my first run at this. You're right, you're absolutely right. I just think it's going to open a door.
Okay, well, the nice thing about the new program is that there is, it's much more prescriptive, like JF said. So I foresee a lot less variability between our courses. And so really, students can change from one CEGEP to the other if they want to complete their degree at another CEGEP, right? That's the idea. So the students should generally be going into university with the same background. So what I'll do is, because we are running long in this section, I'm just going to quickly go over the chemistry discussion, if that's all right. So I'll just briefly go over the weaknesses, the main weaknesses and threats that came out of our discussion. Essentially, the things that may be of interest to other disciplines is that there's no thermodynamics or thermochemistry that has been prescribed, and our university faculty members who are part of our discussion did say that they were disappointed because Gibbs energy is tied in to their acid base and chemical equilibrium concepts. And so this may also pose as a weakness for people who are going into, or for students who are also going into physics and engineering. So this is not emphasized. It doesn't mean it can't be taught, but it's not part of the competencies or the learning activities. As mentioned multiple times, you can see that the organic 1 equivalency is now likely going to be lost, just because so much of the main contents that is needed for the equivalency is being lost in the new program. However, at McGill, that students could get the lab equivalency though. So if we are able to maintain the lab competencies, and that has not changed, except that there's the addition of environmental protection, I believe. But students could get equivalency for the lab component. We are disappointed though that in the new program that we are losing option courses and obviously option hours, especially for the students who are going down the health stream. And we do see that there's a loss in certain topics or components that could be seen in other courses, right? So for those of you who are in biology, osmotic pressure is no longer part of the course curriculum. Neither is Raoult's law, but we know osmotic pressure does come up in a lot of the biology talks. I do know that Gibbs energy also comes up in biology as well. So again, that's not being covered in the chemistry courses. What did come out of, in terms of strengths and opportunities out of our discussions is that, what we're missing now, we could incorporate that into our, the integrative courses. And And we can see, I think, from this discussion, and we also do agree that stats and probability is really a great addition to the program. And based on this discussion that we've had now, we can see how important it is that it will be to have this discussion with our colleagues outside of our department, that it really is important to get out of our silos and have talks to see, if we are missing certain topics from our courses and other departments wants us to bring it back because it's something that, is key in their courses, like, for example, biology with osmotic pressure or some thermodynamics. In our courses, then it's important to have those discussions between our colleagues, because then that gives us a purpose to bring back topics that may not be emphasized in the new program. And so it's great that to have these conversations, and I'm hoping that we can continue these discussions between colleges and also with the universities, because we can see how it will have an impact in developing and then implementing our new programs. So I'll go to Chris and then Carrie.
Hi, everyone. Chris Roderick, Dawson Physics. Carmen, am I misremembering, but there used to be thermal physics as part of the chemistry curriculum, correct? You guys did do some thermodynamics, no?
We did, yeah. Well, we do, but it's not actually. That was something we added here at Dawson. It wasn't part of the. It's not part of the current program.
Okay, because in the physics competencies in the new program, we're expected to, as a competency, talk about global warming, but there's no thermal physics anywhere in the program now. So it's a question I got to put out to the group, and I put it in the chat earlier. What happens if we find in working through this collectively that there are structural deficiencies that are irreparable or make our programs incompatible with getting admissions to university? Does the ministry take it back and rewrite it, or is this fixed in stone now and we just have to cobble some shit together? This is a question to everyone. I don't know the answer.
Were you just waiting for somebody to check?
I'd like an answer, because I felt for the past 2.5 years, I felt like I was shouting into the void because there was no process for me to interface with the writing committee. So these questions are pretty sensible, I think, but there was never an answer. It was sort of, I think, unless I misremember the history of this, back in 2018 when the first draft of this came out, if the universities hadn't piped up and said that's nonsense, we would have been stuck with that. And that was even worse than this. So it is a question. It's open-ended. I don't expect an answer here today, but I hope that someone can find it for us, because I fear that's where we're going to find small little corners that overall the program will hold together, but that we're going to find things that just are bad. And we don't have wiggle room to change. So it's more of a
so Chris, I'll speculate here.
Thank you.
Based off of nothing more than my past few years as program coordinator and being involved in this process. But the previous program was put together in the 90s, and that lasted all the way until now. And it's not like there aren't plenty of deficiencies there, and we just tweaked. I think that's probably what's going to happen here. This process was so long. It was so arduous. The program is signed now. I don't see anybody going back on this. I think it'll be little tweaks and bits and pieces that happen at the local level more than anything else at this stage.
Well,
Could be wrong, but I really don't see anything else happening.
That's what I expect too, but I guess I'm disappointed once again that collectively we can't have seen the obvious things and made the changes. I mean, I hate to think, I'm probably going to be retired by the time the next program revision rolls around, but I hope that we don't end up with the third version also having these baked in deficiencies that we just have to learn to live with. There should be a process that should start with, what does university need? Not the ministry cooking up something and then handing it to us, and then we show it to the universities and they come back to us and say, you should tell the ministry that's not right. It's just, I guess I was involved peripherally with the revision of the physiotherapy technology program. And there was wording explicitly in the program description that was nonsensical. And the coalition of physics teachers in the province that service the physiotherapy program went back to the ministry and said, what you've written here is actual gibberish. And the ministry said, oh, that's okay. I would like to think that the universities are hearing our discontent and that they're seeing the malfunction and that they can go to the university and maybe, figuratively slap some sense into them so that 10 years from now, we're not having the same discussions. Sorry.
I am sure we all feel a similar sentiment, Chris. And I think that if we continue to, voice our, displeasures or things that we're not, thrilled about, as long as we continue mentioning it, at our SPC meetings, and then the science program coordinators can take it up to administration, and that could be hopefully brought forward to the Minister of Education.
I'm just going to jump in because I don't agree with you, Carmen. I think you said that we all feel a certain level of discontent, and I don't think we all do. I personally don't, and I think my colleagues at Marianopolis also don't. If one of them wants to join in, and Jeremy, I see you nodding. I don't know if that means you agree with me or what, but I know the process. So Chris, what you had said about the ministry cooking up something and then sharing it to universities, I don't think that was the actual process. If you go back and look through, certainly the first draft that we got, whenever it was now, the one that really made no sense and there was a big uproar, that was not good. But that was not the first thing. That was not the first step in that process. That was already 2-3 years along in the process. And so I think we need to be careful with what we say, that it reflects the accuracy of what has happened and the accuracy of how people are feeling. I certainly know that throughout the réseau, I've heard very much that there is a great deal of discontent, especially in biology and to a certain extent in chemistry. I've heard that, but I don't think that everywhere feels necessarily the same way. I'm done. Thank you.
Sorry, I apologize for making that assumption. We are running low on time, so I'd like to give Carrie the chance to share her thoughts because she's had her hands up for a while.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to just touch on the thermochemistry, thermodynamics issue for quickly before I forget about that. I don't have access to the very current version of the curriculum as it stands now, but a few months ago when we last were looking at it, since I do teach the baby thermochem and thermodynamics as well, I was concerned to see that it disappeared from the chemistry, but it got shifted over to physics. Did it then get taken completely out? Or is it in physics and nobody noticed it was there?
It was never in physics and they just bolted it up. It's just a topic.
Over there, like let's give it to physics because they wanted to do global warming, or they,
No, there's no lead up to it. Simply the competency is talk about global warming and thermal energy transfer, but there's nothing leading up to it.
I see. So they're just assuming you're going to teach that somehow and wrap it up as global warming.
I will do a lot of interpretive dance is what I'm expecting.
Yeah. Okay.
Oscar?
Just to go back to what Chris was saying and what the two Chris's were saying, what I do feel insatisfaction with is that there is no process to say, okay, you're trying to fit too much in too little time, or you're wanting us to cover this and we need to be preparing them in this way, or the way you're asking us to do this in so little time, it doesn't lead to real learning. So there is no feedback to change things. We just have to make noise. And it would have been nice, and I don't know if it exists, and maybe I'm not aware of it. It would be nice to, as we're, we write these course reports, we write what works, doesn't. It would be nice to have this feedback and all this work that we do of putting these things together, get back to a committee that oversees and allows for these tweaks to happen without having to wait for a big rewrite. It just seems like it's I feel it's too much of a one-way. And I remember, when I first started teaching and I was told you have to do this because it's the ministry requirement. Then when I finally went to read the ministry requirements much later after starting teaching, finding out that no, there's so many things that come from so many ways. We're not sure what needs to be and what has to be. And now there's more complicated things to read. It's going to take a while to integrate them. It's going to take me a while to know if I'm happy or not happy with everything. And then I want my reflections, if I put real energy into them, to be taken seriously. And that's the part I don't feel happens. I feel the reflections are taken seriously maybe by my colleagues or maybe one step, but then they stop there. And so I do echo Chris's dissatisfaction. And doesn't mean that the work or that there aren't good things in the program, but it just feels like it has to be a work in progress. It can't be, okay, now we've integrated, we're robots, we've been programmed to do this, no bugs, go forward.
Jeremy, would you like to add to that? Thank you, Oscar.
Just a word about the discussion about thermodynamics. I mean, if you look at the current program, it doesn't show up anywhere. I know that in many places chemistry is covering it, but it's not prescribed anywhere. Whereas in the new program, it is now prescribed in the waves class. It does say détermination appropriée de l'énergie thermique transférée par conduction et par rayonnement. I agree there's no lead up to it. So I guess implicitly what they're expecting us to do is introduce it at a level sufficient for students to have a basic understanding. I mean, it is a CEGEP level course, right? We're not doing a full thermodynamics course here. We're just introducing the general ideas so that once students get to university, they at least have some idea of what the concepts are, and then they can go into more depth. But yeah, the fact that it wasn't there in the current program, so I don't think it's a loss to now have it there in the program. And yeah, it's in the physics course, so we're the ones who are going to have to figure out how to teach it.
And that's true. That there were topics there are topics that we are teaching now that are not really listed as an element of competency or a specific learning activity that we have to teach. But it did get incorporated because we felt that, there are certain topics that are missing and that would be helpful. At this point, yeah, I think there will be a lot of tweaking just because it is a new program and we don't, it's hard to see the whole thing, see the big picture. And so tweaking is definitely going to have to come. And that comes with also talking to our colleagues outside our disciplines. So we should move on to our next part of the presentation today, or the workshop. But there seems to be technical issues right now. Sean is having difficulties joining us at the moment. And so we are trying to help him get in. So if you could just give us a few minutes, if you'd like, I'll open up the floor and you can continue your conversation while I try to help Sean get back into the meeting. So we've got Sean back. And so if it's all right, if there's no,
I'm here. I'm back. I'm back, baby.
Great.
Oh, okay. Such is life, eh? All right. So Carmen, you want to share it? And then
yeah,
I'll give my CPU a little bit of a break here. So apologies for that, folks, especially because it's so close to the lunch hour. And I'm sure, after a long morning of deep pedagogical discussion, there's no place you'd rather be but lunch. Let's get moving on this. So Carmen, why don't you flip the slide, please? So I want to bring us back to something JF had mentioned in going over the new program. It's this ONTC competency, and this is the capstone course, for lack of a better term. And what it's main goal or for the students is they have to be able to demonstrate the integration of one's acquired skills within science, not necessarily a particular discipline, but just within science in general. Now, what does that mean in the context of this course? By and large, it's an experimental course. So students have to basically ask questions, maybe form their own hypotheses. They have to look at this question that they're asking themselves from a multidisciplinary perspective. So it can't just be within chemistry or physics or math or whatever. It's got to be looking at it from different perspectives. They have to develop their own methodology for exploring this question, collect data, analyze results, and ultimately draw conclusions from their findings. And then in an interesting little bit, they also have to do a bit of self-reflection about what they've actually learned over the course of this particular class. It's a 45-hour course, and obviously it's quite lab-based. Carmen, if you could just click ahead. So when you really think about it, when you hear this course, when you really read it, the first thing that really springs to mind is it's really trying to address one of the major shortcomings our students seem to have leaving the current program, which is this inability to actually ask questions, this inability to think like a scientist, as it were, to critically think, to deal with muddy situations and open-endedness, because it's putting them right into the very being of what a scientist is supposed to be. It's supposed to be applying the scientific method. So choosing a subject or exploring phenomena of interest, formulating questions, maybe selecting materials from a repository of tools, looking into literature, finding out what's actually being done and adapting it as necessary, doing your experiment, doing your investigation, doing your design project, if it's a design project, and ultimately looking at, did you achieve your goals, yes or no, or did you answer your questions? All right, we can flip here, Carmen. So really it goes back and it harkens back to something Caroline was talking about, which is this idea of scientific autonomy. And how do we get our students to sort of independently think and act like a scientist? Well, there's a couple of avenues we could obviously do this. We can do it in the lab, we can do it in class. So in the lab, and we heard this sort of iterated, I think it was in the chemistry discussion, but in sort of teaching students different skills and techniques, protocols, disciplinary approaches to science and investigation, trying to ensure that we keep bringing those tools back. We keep revisiting the toolkit semester after semester, getting them exposed to it. And it's not just a one-off, but rather these are the tools we use as scientists. These are the approaches we use as scientists. And to get that to be reinforced. And the more they see it, the more they sort of become second nature. But now there's this additional challenge in the new program to look at not just applying those within one's discipline or subject area of interest, but to get them to address it across disciplines and look for those commonalities. And I think that's a nice thing I was hearing in the discussion this morning, be it in the breakout room and the larger discussion, the part that I was attending just now. But what's really nice about this is we're getting out of the silos, and we keep hearing that, getting out of the silos and talking to each other and looking at this with real program lens. And that affords us opportunities to remind ourselves of where are the commonalities, where are the intersections between these different scientific disciplines, be they math, physics, chemistry, geology, or whatnot. And then, of course, we can bring this into the classroom, right? And I think we're all being guilty. I was certainly guilty of it when I started as a teacher, that my students were empty vessels, and I'm going to pour a lot of content in them, and they need this content to survive university because they're going to get more content in university. But we're looking at now is maybe content with purpose. And this comes from Lejean, this idea of integration of learning. So yes, you're learning all this content, but can you contextualize it? Can we can students sort of actualize this knowledge in some sort of real and authentic way? Can we get students to view science more as a multidisciplinary domain, and again, see those intersections, bring in, and not just like a one-off of, you know, oh, this is how equilibrium is related to climate change and it's a one slide on your lecture notes, but rather like, let's look at it in depth and really look at science as a domain as opposed to just our own discipline. And we see a lot of this in the QEP, particularly in the high schools, where students are looking at doing now these evaluation situations and integrated type projects where they are doing exactly that. So our students are coming to us into the CEGEP system with these skills, and maybe these are skills that we can continue to develop and make sure that they move on with them into a university setting. this is what's being asked of us. So what it really means, next click there, Carmen, please, is we're looking at the program approach, which is a dirty word for some, certainly some of the elder states people here, but the more and more we look at this program and we hear the feedback from our peers at the next stage in post-secondary education, the more we're hearing, we maybe need a little bit more of this. Okay, we need to start thinking about this collectively. And that includes our university partners. And we've heard that echoed during today's discussion, that they're stakeholders in this too. And there's commonalities there as well. There's crossover in a lot of our courses. And what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about that transition piece? All right, Carmen. So where do these inquiry guided labs come in? So what are they? These are laboratory activities that basically provide students with really opportunities to embody scientific principles and investigation, to truly look at design in authentic ways, to basically look at the big picture and be able to actualize within sort of these muddy or open sorts of concepts. What inquiry guided labs afford our students to do is really, and that's the core of it, is choices in what they do. When we all did graduate studies, we had choices in what we wanted to explore. Maybe some of it was prescribed by our supervisor, but ultimately we were asked to take the ball and run with it and come back with findings and to discuss these and let the project evolve. So at some point when you are a practicing scientist, it's about choices and choosing a direction. Sometimes those choices are wrong, and that's okay. But that's what this is about. It's trying to mimic that for our students as early on as possible. And giving students choices, you give them a chance to explore things, which is quite powerful as a learning tool. And maybe with enough sort of guidance in these two areas, students could even start to ask their own questions about what they're learning and choose their own directions and explore it. And what's nice about this is that in creating more authentic types of experiences, particularly in the laboratory setting, is that we could start to model not just disciplinary reasoning, but interdisciplinary reasoning, really trying to get at the core of some of these other goals that we saw beyond the competencies, the 6 goals of the program, which is getting our students to think more authentically as scientists. All right. So what might be happening in our lab curriculum right now, and I'm sure it's varied from institution to institution, but I would hazard to guess that probably a lot of it is still very much rooted in sort of our traditional approaches to laboratory instruction. And it's not to disparage a traditional lab. I want to make that quite clear. They serve a purpose. But when students are basically faced through or presented with a 2-year CEGEP program plus 3 to 4 years of a bachelor's program where all they're doing is traditional type labs, then we're really not addressing the skill set that people are wishing of our students by the time they get to graduate school. So what are we usually doing in traditional labs? We're practicing techniques, a very valuable experience. Yes, students might be learning instruments or ways of investigating things. Often they're to verify a law or principle, and in many ways, almost like invoking calibration in some cases, right? I like to think of it that way. Like, did I do this right? Yes, I did, because I got to an end goal. I have verified that my procedure or my protocol or my technique was right. Often it's still to model disciplinary approaches, but I would argue it does so in a very passive way, that it's up to the students to somehow pick up this modeling through osmosis. And then ultimately, whatever you're doing in this traditional lab, you collect data and analyze it, but it's often within the confines of a well-defined procedure. And even sometimes the analysis, this is instructor dependent often, might be also very constrained. Here, answer these questions and your report is done. What we're suggesting in inquiry guided labs, and this isn't us who, our research team, or I'm part of a larger research team here that's exploring this at the CEGEP level. It's not that we've invented this, but rather we're sort of exploring it in detail. But in our view, what are we doing with inquiry guided labs is we're trying to develop this autonomy we've referred to. We're trying to prepare students for more open-endedness and the challenges that presents. We're trying to get students to get a better understanding of science as practice and a process, really getting them to embody the scientific method, as it were. And the analysis of what they find and what conclusions they want to draw is basically up to them, but with very limited guidance. So we give them maybe some constraints, and then off they go. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Carmen. Blanchard and Buck have kind of looked at sort of guided inquiry as a practice and have sort of identified that there's, and this varies in the literature, but maybe there's like 3 different sort of levels of inquiry. Some where the inquiry is highly prescribed and highly scaffolded, and that would be level 1. This is the verification style labs we were just talking about, right? So, to take something from chemistry, you're going to do a titration and you're going to verify the concentration of this unknown solution. If it's biology, you're going to plate some cells and we're going to inoculate one agar plate with streptomycin, and we're going to count and see which colonies are streptomycin resistant. Did it work? Yes, great. They're streptomycin resistant. So the idea is, again, we're going to, a lot of that context in these level 1 labs is highly prescribed. So the teacher basically poses the scenario, poses the question, if you will, if there is a question, but then you're following a cookbook recipe. And then the interpretation might be prescribed again by the teacher, or maybe the students are left with a little bit more open-endedness because they know how to basically analyze the raw data at that point. Level 2 is what we would call guided inquiry. So this is where we start to open up the ability for students to start to choose their own adventure, if you will. So maybe the question is still sort of asked of the students, but now the experimental methods become of their own choosing, that we're not handing them the lab report anymore. And it's not that they're getting a procedure with less details. It's they literally, maybe you're not getting a procedure at all. Maybe there's some constraints, like you're going to use this device, or you're going to use this technique, but it's up to you how you want to use it. And again, the interpretation then becomes open to the students. So it's slowly removing some of the support mechanisms that maybe the verification lab is serving, maybe to model a disciplinary approach, but we're going to take off these, what do you call them, like training wheels, if you will, and eventually we're going to leave you to make some of the decision making. So it's empowering the students to be involved in this process. And then finally, this idea of level 3, this open inquiry, where entirely the exploration, the choices is left entirely up to the student and what they want to investigate in the context of what they're learning. Carmen, if you can maybe just click twice here. So some of the stuff that we're finding in our research is that maybe level 2 is where we could take our students at the CEGEP level. That maybe they still need a bit of those training wheels, and maybe arguably a student really doesn't do open inquiry until they're maybe at a master's or a PhD. Although there's some evidence in literature to show, and even some of you who are in attendance now have described to me very eloquently how you're trying to confer some of those students' choices in your university program, often in the 3rd year. Certainly when I was a student way back when, and it was a very transformative experience, the ability to do research projects as an undergraduate credited course in your last year. I was fortunate enough to actually do that in my 3 years, my BSc through the Science College at Concordia. But all that to say, again, even in those experiences that I had personally, a lot of it in my 1st year and 2nd year were highly constrained, again, because I was just new to the game. All right, let's keep going, Carmen. The key of guidance here is, the guidance is the key. And one of the knocks against inquiry-based approaches or inquiry guided approaches is that they're so open-ended that it almost paralyzes the students, that no learning takes place because the cognitive load is too much. And so you can't just sort of jump into this. It really takes careful consideration in course design. And so what you want to do is work in those guiding elements, scaffolds, in other words, if you look that up in the literature. So what role might these scaffolds or this guidance play? So one is to increase the student's ability to engage in the task, and often it's by reducing cognitive load. If we throw too much at the students, they just don't know how to cope. And certainly we hear that from, again, the Conseil reports that students in university, they just become paralyzed by these choices that they're forced to make at some point in their university education. So it's finding ways to mitigate that when you sort of introduce the openness, like it's baby steps, right? It helps to simplify a complex task by providing some constraints. I'll show you guys. Actually, I took that example out. for time. But for instance, one of my colleagues who's involved in a research project, he teaches a waves and optics course, and one of his laboratory experiences, so there's a lot of scaffolding along the way, but ultimately it culminates in the students having to design an instrument, a string or a pipe-based instrument that can play 3 notes, and the student has to be able to confirm what those notes are and then actually be able to play a song for fun. And so again, the constraints are there in terms of, it's not just build an instrument, it's like, okay, let's make it a manageable task within the context of what I've taught the students in this course. All right, next slide, please, or next. Motivate by adapting the challenge to ability. So it's again, recognizing what you're working with. So those of us in the CEGEP system, we've got students that are coming in with varied levels of, contact time in the lab, especially during this pandemic period. And so if we want to move towards open-endedness, when is the right time? And how do we maybe take some of our traditional labs and provide that scaffolding and make it a bit more inquiry, where we're affording the students some choices, but at the same time, we're doing that to make sure that they stay motivated on task, because there's nothing more demotivating than failure, right? But more on that in a minute. Providing prompts without giving the answer. This is a tough one, especially if you're the instructor or acting as the prompt, the live prompt. I was able to watch Caroline and Véronique from André Laurando as part of our research. They have a lab where they have the students have to identify the identity of a commercial vinegar. There's like 4 or 5 different varieties you have to choose from. But what they do is provide some time in class for the students to brainstorm how exactly they're going to go about that. And it's in the context of learning a weak acid, ionization, buffers, and titration curves. And it was really interesting to watch their students sort of brainstorm some stuff, because it was almost like they're just pulling stuff out of their textbook, out of what they learned in the lesson, and oftentimes going in the wrong direction. And when Caroline or Véronique would actually check in with the students, it would be like, so how's it going? The students would describe sort of their thinking, but then they would prompt them with questions like, why are you doing that? What purpose might that serve? What kind of data do you expect to get out of that? How is that going to answer your question? So not actually telling them what the right answer is, and not even, I mean, it was kind of neat to watch. It was almost like Jedi mind tricks in a way, just how, trying to prompt them to think about it and to prompt reflection. Like, why are you doing certain things? And that's sort of, again, getting the students to, and I like to use that term, embody, to really embody why they're doing certain things and why they're making certain choices, and why that will work maybe might dawn upon them, or why it won't work. Next thing, to reduce frustration with challenges. I think we've talked about that. Looking at the time, we'll move on. And then finally, demonstrate and model disciplinary reasoning, as we said, and that the example I just gave kind of does that. All right, let's keep going, Carmen. Transitioning to IBL, does this mean, well, this sounds really good. Do I throw everything out the window? And the answer is no. There's ways of adapting pre-existing lab curriculum to this sort of paradigm. A really interesting article that was produced in JChem Ed by Farley and coworkers. Basically, they propose a very simple 4-step process for maybe transitioning to this kind of domain. It's by first looking closely at your learning objectives. And the beauty of right now, this new program reform, is we're going to be doing exactly that, CEGEP teachers. We're going to be looking closely at what the learning objectives are of our courses, and really thinking about what is it that we're supposed to be teaching. And then looking at your existing curriculum and asking yourself, is it meeting those objectives? Look for rooms for open-endedness, where you can kind of afford the students some choices and maybe do something a little bit more interesting than something that's highly prescribed. One of the interesting things that Farley discusses is, there's some experiments that we do or that they identified in their own approach in their curriculum redesign, that we had some really cool experiments. But you know what? They were like one-offs. Like at no other point in their program did we ever touch these things again or even mention them. And so those were the things that they took out of their lab curriculum. And that what that affords is now time. And that's, again, one of the major criticisms of inquiry guided approaches is that it takes so much time. But maybe we just have to use our time strategically and make time for these types of experiences. So once you've kind of identified things, you could adapt and change your activities as needed. And then it's a question of implementing. All right.
You want me to do this?
Yeah, go for it, Carl. But we got 5 minutes, I realize.
Yeah, this is going to take 30 seconds. So I'm going to go through this very quickly because this isn't actually something we do. This was just an idea I threw out when Sean and I were talking this over earlier, last semester. In our General Biology 1 class, by the way, this is an example of how you could go about doing this. Again, it's not what we do, but it's just an idea. In our General Biology 1 class, when we're in person, one of the labs that we do is a survey lab where we have students look around and see various things about plants. And we have them build a plant phylogeny from this. And this isn't a lab that certainly has some value, but if we wanted to transition towards this kind of IBL approach, this is something that we could potentially get rid of for the sake of fostering more inquiry. In a little bit later on in the semester, 2 weeks later, we kind of build off of this because during that lab, we set up an experiment whose data we collect during a lab 2 weeks later. But the students don't come up with the methodologies themselves. They don't have the question. They don't have the hypothesis. They don't come up with the methodology. All they really do is collect the data, and then they're required to do the analysis. Carmen. If we were going to do this in an IBL way, we could get rid of that more survey lab and then instead present a little bit more of the theory behind what they were doing during that lab and have the students work through their own study design and deal with the flaws of their study design and try and come up with something that could actually work. And they could do this in a guided way because we would have the time to allow them to do that. And then and the entire point of this lab would really be to set up the experiment. And in the biology department, we have 3-hour labs, so we could do this appropriately in a 3-hour context. And then once they've done that, 2 weeks later, then they collect the data from an experiment that they've set up. And it probably would make it a lot easier for them to go through all of this because it would be their own experiment rather than just something they did and they have to muddle through. So this is just an example of how we could approach this.
Thanks, Carl. And then we have other examples in chemistry and biology, not biology, physics. And Carl and I and Caroline and Veronique and our research team, we've been involved in giving workshops in this area. So if this is something that's of interest to you and wanting to flip into this kind of paradigm, feel free to reach out and talk to us. I think oftentimes, in hearing Carl describe his activity, I'm sure some of you were thinking, but what if they screw up? And maybe that's okay. I'll tell you, when I was a graduate student, I think I was wrong for about 5 years straight for my PhD, like wrong and banging square pegs into round holes because I just didn't know how to work around the issues I was having. I just didn't have the experience. I was used to everything being right because I was brought up on verification labs. And then finally, I had an aha moment in talking with somebody. And then I think I wrapped up my PhD within a year. So, it's all that to say is that maybe we have to get the students used to making mistakes. But maybe there's room for productive failure. So getting students to reflect about things, maybe giving them a second crack at the can if we can make time for these types of valuable experiences. Review lab activities, or maybe even do what Carl has suggested, that maybe before the lab activity, you have the students brainstorm and think of things, but you're there to coach along the way, not necessarily to put them on the right path, but to get them to reflect upon what they're thinking. And then to get them to reflect upon it after. So what didn't work? And I saw in the chat, like, do we have examples of others? Yes, we do. In chemistry, but my physics colleague does a bunch of traditional labs, but what he almost has his students do is predict what the procedure would be if you were investigating this cold. And then he has neat little ways of then reinforcing what would have worked for his students and what didn't. And so maybe it's a question now we have to think about or rethink what it is we're evaluating. Are we evaluating right answers in the lab? Yeah, sometimes, because we want to see if they know a technique right. But maybe we also have to be evaluating scientific process and whether the students are actually thinking about what they're learning. And maybe what we're doing right now and having these discussions might prompt some of that. Okay. Yeah, so if we bring it back to the reform feedback, we heard the criticisms, and what we've got right now is an opportunity to maybe better develop scientific autonomy by careful reconsideration of lab curriculum, because that's where a lot of our students are going to pick this up. And I know there's an emphasis on the experimental here, but it's the same thing in math. Like, what are we doing in the math labs? How do we reinforce math culture and thinking like a mathematician would? And are we using that time wisely in the lab, or is it just basically we're just doing a lot of practice problems? And maybe that's enough, I don't know, but it's something to think about. Okay, Carmen. So what might be hopefully our main takeaways here from today's session? One, I think, is we got to keep the discussion going, ladies and gentlemen. That's something that I heard echoed in all of our breakout session reports. Hopefully you found some of these discussions useful. There are communities of practice that the Saltese group organizes in chemistry, physics, and biology. Carl, I believe, is heading up the biology one. Carmen is in charge of the chemistry one. Is it Jean-Francois who's doing physics? There we go. And we're waiting for maybe some enterprising mathematician to think about maybe starting a math S4, because why not? One of the things we failed to mention is that implementation of this new program is compulsory 2024 in the CEGEP level. It could start as early as fall 2022 if people already had their ducks in a row and could predict the future. It seems like a couple of colleges have. But to our university partners, all this to say, expect new students in 2026 at the latest. And this is why we're discussing things now and trying to prompt these kinds of collaborations, because we're all going to have to change, whether we like it or not. The CEGEPs can do a lot of interesting things, but we could also only do so much within the constraints of the new program. We've lost a lot of wiggle room with the option courses. There's great opportunities with the integrated course, but the integrated course is not going to be a catch-all for all the content our students are missing. We're going to have to adapt at both ends. And so opportunity awaits, and now is the time for us, and I take the words from Carolyn here, it's the teachers here. Now is our time to maybe make some positive changes in science education, and to really design a program that hopefully come 2024 is really going to prepare our students for the realities of science. All right. So just a quick thank you to Saltese for their support in all this. Liz Charles, as always, the master puppeteer behind the scenes as consultant and our observer. The Saltese office behind the scenes. I want to thank the rest of my research team that I'm involved with that comprises Carl and Veronique and Carolyn, work that we've been doing that helped inform some of this discussion, to Jérémy Choquette, the designer and creator of CourseFlow, and to you, of course, thank you for being here on a Monday morning for 3 hours to discuss science program reform. And I guess I guess we could take 5 minutes maybe for some questions. I'm sorry again that I threw a wrench in the plans, but my computer shut down entirely, and Murphy's law, right? Carmen, do you want to handle the speakers list, or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Just to mention are the recordings from today's meeting and the slides. We also have references here listed in our slides. They'll be posted on the Saltese website shortly, I suppose, hopefully later this week. Krista, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, hi. I love this idea of the inquiry-based labs. We try to incorporate that as much as we can at my college right now with some of our option courses. But with respect to the integrated course, the 45-hour course, how does this address the competency that the students should be choosing their own project? That's the part I find the hardest with this integrated course. I don't know how to get them to choose something that's not a disaster.
No, that's a really good question. I know Caroline's going to want to chime in on this, so I'm going to name her so she can speak next. But the way I envision this course is again, how far can we take our students at the CEGEP level? And again, like I'm thinking of level 2, right? Do we need to constrain some of that integrated course, constrain some of the questions that the students can ask. You know, in talking with my colleagues, there's people who are talking about, are we going to offer like flavors of this course, like that are discipline specific? Are we going to look at like team teaching this and making it truly multidisciplinary? You know, and you know, I know in some of the French CEGEPs, there are colleges right now that they already have a course like this. They're already running with something like this. The students basically, you know, they give their wish list. I would like to do something that's more physics oriented, but second choice is chemistry and third choice is biology. And then they get what they get and they work at it. So there's going to be questions about how we implement the course, but also, again, it's what can we really expect of our students? And I think this is where we got to take a really good hard look at the program and recognize, like, how far can we take them in terms of a project like this? What are we scaffolding in the different semesters? What kind of ways of thinking are we pressing upon them? And there's limitations, right, of what we might be able to do. And then that, I think, will inform how this course is going to play out. Caroline, I don't know if you want to, I'm going to put you on the spot. I don't know if you want to add something here with usually magical insight.
I just want to add one thing, and that's one thing I wrote in the chat, because I don't think that we have enough time now to discuss everything about that. But we are conducting workshops in parallel to this one, and we have started maybe in August last year, and maybe you were there to that first workshop, and we are continuing those type of discussions in other meetings, because now we unfortunately don't have enough time to discuss everything around that. But I can, if you ever want to be part of that distribution list where we write to everyone, like there will be a workshop on that topic, please send us an email. And I think our email addresses are in the presentation that will be shared, right? So you just have to write to us and you will be informed of every other meeting that we will have. And it's really interesting. Those meetings are sometimes interdisciplinary, but most of the time intradisciplinary, so we can really discuss things, really concrete things, and really applicable things in our teaching.
I think there was Karim from John Abbott who had his hand up.
Yeah, I wasn't sure because we don't have much time and we've gone a bit over, but one of the things that really worries me is the CI and ponderation for this integrated project. And specifically, I mean, I teach an option course where I have the students do real science and they do real data, real research, and I have to constrain it to a few possible projects just to make it handleable while I'm also teaching the content, because at least I have an idea of what direction things will go, where they might have stumbling blocks, where I have to provide them with additional resources. If we have every single science student going through this integrative project, and if we're not constraining it to, you know, thematic courses offered by people who are comfortable leading research in that area or leading open-ended questions across that discipline, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get the students to have anywhere near the type of outcome you want them to have, but also consistent outcomes across the courses offered by many different teachers. And we're just going to end up with the same type of, well, let's go with this teacher because he requires the least amount of work before he'll give you the pass on the comprehensive assessment, versus this teacher who actually makes you, go through all the steps and all the reflection and everything before he's willing to sign off on it. That's going to come back. And that's what we had pre this prior reform. And so I'm very hesitant. And then when Sean said that some CEGEPs are implementing this coming fall, my question was, what are they doing with the integrated project? How are they doing this? Do we have an idea of how their college is looking at it in terms of the amount of resources or the amount of CI that they're attaching to this? So I don't know if anybody has information on that, but I thought I'd ask.
Maybe just 1 second. Actually, we are doing a comprehensive project, and we have been doing that for a long time at our CEGEP, and that's what Sean told. Like, students choose their subject and they actually buy new chemicals, and they do exactly what Sean described, and it works. But I don't have time now to explain why. and it does. So if you were ever interested in that, maybe we can have a parallel discussion. But
can I just
yes.
ask, like, how many students each teacher supervises for a 45-hour course?
It's a group, like 25, 30 students.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
That is a very interesting discussion to continue. I think that as Réjean mentioned, the logistics and resources, how do we organize that in the new program? And I see that as, you know, a challenge, but it's great to hear, Carolyn, that there is a way that you guys have a way that you have used and that works. So we have gone over time. I didn't think we'd go beyond the 3 hours, but I can see that for me, this has been a really great discussion, and I'm so glad that you guys could all be here and to share your thoughts. So on behalf of my team, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and we wish you all much health and happiness, and I hope that we can return to more in-person gatherings and in-person classes before the end of the semester, hopefully by spring break. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Bye for now.